My name is Margaret Foster, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 53 years old and live in Millbrook, a small town in upstate New York where neighbors still wave at strangers and the local diner knows your coffee order by heart. I've been a high school English teacher here for 30 years, trying to convince teenagers that Shakespeare matters to their lives, but I'm not telling you this story about teaching. I'm telling you about something that happened 3 months ago that completely changed how I see my family and what it means to pass down a legacy. My father, Robert Foster, died 2 years ago at 78. He was a carpenter who could build anything with his hands. Our house is filled with his work: kitchen cabinets, bookshelves, the front porch swing where I still drink my morning coffee. Every piece was crafted with patience and an attention to detail that seems to be disappearing from the world. Dad's basement workshop was his sanctuary. It smelled of sawdust and oil, organized in a way that made perfect sense to him and none to anyone else. After he died, I couldn't touch anything for almost 2 years. His tools hung exactly where he left them, his workbench still had wood shavings, and his coffee mug sat beside his vise as if he might return any moment. My son David is 25, a computer programmer in Manhattan who makes more in a month than I make in 3. He's smart and successful, but somewhere along the way, he became someone I barely recognize. As a child, he loved spending time in Grandpa's workshop, standing on a wooden crate wearing oversized safety goggles, handing Dad whatever tool he needed with such seriousness, but as David grew older, those visits became rare. First school activities, then college, then his career consumed his time. He'd come home for holidays, spend most of his time on his phone, and leave claiming he had important work to catch up on. That's what made my decision feel so important. I thought that by giving him Dad's tools, I could bridge the gap that had grown between us, between him and his grandfather's memory. I spent weeks cleaning each tool, researching their history. Some were older than me. The socket set was a wedding gift, the handsaw inherited from Dad's father. These weren't just tools. They were pieces of our family story. I called David and told him I had something special from his grandfather. He seemed pleased and promised to visit that weekend. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful about our relationship. That Saturday morning, I made David's favorite breakfast: blueberry pancakes and bacon. I arranged Dad's tools on the dining room table, each one polished, along with handwritten notes explaining their history. The Stanley hand plane Dad had restored, the 40-year-old Craftsman socket set, wooden-handled chisels still sharp enough to shave paper, and the red toolbox that had been Dad's pride and joy. When David arrived around noon, he looked exactly like what he was: a successful professional who'd rather be anywhere else. Expensive jeans, a sweater that probably cost more than my monthly clothing budget. He hugged me briefly, already checking his phone. "Sorry I'm late, Mom. Traffic was insane, and I had a call from Singapore." I led him to the dining room where Dad's tools waited. "I wanted to give you something special. These were your grandfather's tools." David glanced at the table, and for a moment I saw something that might have been recognition. But then his phone buzzed. "Oh, wow. This is really old." He picked up the hand plane like he was examining an artifact from another civilization. "It's not just old," I said, trying to keep enthusiasm in my voice. "Your grandfather restored that himself. This socket set was a wedding gift to your grandparents. Every bolt in this house has been tightened with these tools." David nodded absently, scrolling through his phone. That's nice, Mom." "David, could you put your phone away? This is important." He looked up with barely concealed annoyance, but pocketed his phone. "Look, Mom, I appreciate this, really. But honestly, I can just buy better ones online. These are pretty beat up, and technology has come so far. You can get cordless power tools now that do twice the work in half the time." I felt like he'd slapped me. "These tools built this house, David. Your grandfather used that hammer for 40 years. "Right, exactly. 40 years. Don't you think it's time for an upgrade? If I ever need tools, which probably won't happen since I can hire professionals, I'll just order whatever I need on Amazon. 2-day shipping, brand new, warranty included." I stared at this stranger who looked like the little boy who used to beg his grandfather to teach him how to use a screwdriver. Something broke inside me. "You don't understand. These aren't just tools, they're what, Mom? Look, I know they have sentimental value for you, but I live in a Manhattan condo. I don't have space for all this stuff, and I wouldn't know what to do with it anyway. Your grandfather wanted you to have them." David sighed like he was dealing with an elderly relative who didn't understand the modern world. "Mom, Grandpa lived in a different time. Back then, people had to fix things because they couldn't afford to replace them. Now it's more efficient to just buy new." I got very quiet. "Fine. You're probably right. I'll put them back in the basement." David seemed to realize he'd hurt me. "Don't be upset. It's not personal. But hey, maybe I could help you sell them? Some might be worth something to collectors. We could put them on eBay. That's when I asked him to leave. After his car disappeared, I sat surrounded by Dad's tools and cried harder than I had since the day he died. But I wasn't just crying for Dad, I was crying for my son, who had lost the ability to see value in anything that couldn't be quantified or upgraded. That night, I put each tool back in Dad's workshop exactly where it belonged. But I couldn't stop thinking about David's words, and a plan began to form, a way to show him what he was really rejecting. The following week, I decided to document every tool and create a presentation showing David their true value. I started with Dad's red Craftsman toolbox, organizing and cataloging everything. In the bottom drawer, underneath screws and washers, I found something that didn't belong, a small metal box wrapped in old leather. Inside were 3 photographs I'd never seen, letters tied with ribbon, and a notebook in Dad's handwriting. The first photo showed a beautiful young woman with dark hair standing in front of a familiar-looking house. On the back, Elena, 1962. The second showed the same woman holding a baby, and the third showed Dad, younger than I'd ever seen him, with his arm around her. The first letter was dated 1963, addressed to "My dearest Robert," in Spanish, signed by Elena Martinez from Millbrook. I understood enough to grasp the meaning. She missed him, hoped he would visit, talked about our little Carlos, and how much he looked like his father, our little Carlos. Our baby. Dad had another son. The notebook contained dates, addresses, and records of money sent. Entries spanning from 1963 to 1969, when they stopped abruptly with, "Elena died in car accident. Carlos with aunt in Mexico. We'll try to find him when he's older." From the letters and notebook, a story emerged. In 1962, Dad had met Elena Martinez while working construction. They'd fallen in love, she'd gotten pregnant, but her family opposed the relationship. Elena returned to Mexico, but she and Dad stayed in contact. For years, he sent money, significant amounts for a young carpenter trying to establish himself. Then Elena died in 1968. The final letter was formal, in English, informing Mr. Foster that Elena Martinez had died in an automobile accident and her son Carlos was with relatives in Mexico. No return address. Dad's last notebook entry: tried to contact Elena's family through church. No response. Carlos would be 6 now. We'll keep trying. But he never found him. I sat in that workshop until midnight, holding pieces of my father's life I'd never suspected. Dad had been a father to another child, had loved another woman, had carried this loss his entire life without telling anyone. But what struck me most was realizing that Dad had spent years supporting a child he barely knew, out of love and responsibility. When Elena died, he'd tried to find Carlos, not to claim him, but to ensure he was okay. These weren't the actions of someone who saw relationships as disposable. This was a man who understood that some connections transcend convenience, that love creates lifelong obligations. As I looked at the photos and letters, I realized I might be able to do what Dad never could: find Carlos. And if I could find him, maybe I could show David what honoring a father's legacy really means. I spent days learning to search for people online. Carlos Martinez brought thousands of results. Adding Elena Martinez and San Miguel de Allende narrowed it down. I found 3 possibilities and sent careful messages in my limited Spanish, including scanned photos. The first 2 responses were polite but wrong. But on Friday, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Foster? This is Carlos Martinez. I think you might be looking for me." His voice made my heart skip. It reminded me of Dad's careful way of speaking. We talked for 2 hours. Carlos had grown up knowing his father was Robert Foster, but his Aunt Rosa said it would be too complicated to find him. Elena had kept one photo of Dad and told Carlos stories about the kind man who'd tried to care for them from far away. She said he was a good man. She said he wanted to marry her, but Abuela wouldn't allow it. Different times. She never blamed him for anything. Carlos had become a carpenter like his father. He owned a furniture-making business in Phoenix, specializing in custom pieces made with traditional techniques. "I work with my hands. My wife jokes that I'm old-fashioned, but I like to make things that last." I guess I got that from him. When I told Carlos about Dad's tools and David's rejection, there was silence. "Your father kept trying to find me. For years. He never forgot you. Mrs. Foster, Maggie, I have something you should know. My mother kept letters too. Your father's letters to her. When she died, Tia Rosa gave them to me." My throat tightened. What did they say? He asked her to marry him in almost every letter. He wanted to bring us to New York, wanted us to be a family. He said he was learning Spanish to talk to me when I got older. He sent pictures of the house he was building. "Your house," he said. He was making it big enough for all of us. I cried thinking of my father building our house with rooms for children he might never meet. There's something else. In his last letters, he wrote about his tools. He said someday, when he found me, he wanted to teach me to use them. He said working with your hands was putting love into the world, that every piece carried a bit of your heart. Carlos, how would you feel about coming to New York? There are people you should meet and tools you should see. I'd like that very much. But Maggie? I have ideas about your son that might help him understand what he's walking away from. Carlos flew in on a Thursday in March. The moment I saw him, I started crying. He looked so much like Dad. Same strong hands, same way of standing, same thoughtful eyes. We spent the morning sharing stories. That afternoon, we went to Dad's workshop. Carlos moved through the space like he belonged, handling tools with reverence that comes from understanding their purpose. He was better than I thought, Carlos said, examining a hand plane. Look at this restoration work. This is master level craftsmanship. David called them obsolete. Carlos smiled. Your son isn't wrong about technology. These are old-fashioned. But he's missing something important. You could buy a better hammer, but you can't buy this hammer. You can't buy the connection to the person who used it, the knowledge it represents, the love in every project it helped complete. That evening, I called David. I found something in Grandpa's workshop. Something important. I need you to come home. What kind of something? I found your Uncle Carlos. David arrived Saturday, clearly annoyed but curious. When he saw Carlos, the resemblance stopped him in his tracks. We shared the story, Dad's relationship with Elena, the separation, the letters, the search that lasted until his death. David listened with growing amazement. But why are you here now? David asked. Because your mother found me, and it's time you understood what you inherited last weekend. In the workshop, Carlos demonstrated using Dad's tools to craft a small jewelry box. Your grandfather wrote about working with wood. He said every tool teaches you something about the material, about yourself, about the relationship between intention and result. A power tool cuts faster, but it can't teach you to listen to the grain, to understand what the wood wants to become. He took a shaving so thin you could see through it. This plane is 70 years old. It's been adjusted by your grandfather's hands until it worked exactly how he needed. You can buy a better plane online, but you can't buy this relationship. You can't buy the knowledge built into these adjustments. David watched, transfixed. But the technology is wonderful. I use power tools every day. But David, technology without understanding is just noise. These tools taught your grandfather patience, precision, respect. That knowledge made him better at everything, not worse. Carlos picked up the socket set. Your grandfather sent money to support me and my mother for years, money he needed for his own life. He earned it with these tools, building things that lasted. This isn't just a socket set, it's testament to responsibility, commitment, the kind of love that shows up in actions. He turned to David. When your mother offered these tools, she wasn't giving you old equipment. She was offering connection to a man who understood that some things matter more than efficiency. A man who spent 40 years proving that love is something you do, not just feel. David was quiet, looking at the tools with different eyes. I don't know how to use any of this. That's okay. Neither did your grandfather when he started. Learning is part of the gift. But I live in the city. I don't have space for a workshop. You don't need a workshop, I said. You need understanding. You need to know you come from people who believed in building things that last, whether furniture, families, relationships, or values. David picked up the wooden-handled hammer, really looking at it this time. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't understand. I thought you were trying to give me old stuff I didn't need. And now? Now I think. Maybe I'm the one who needs upgrading. 3 months later, David moved back to Millbrook. Over the weeks following his meeting with Carlos, he'd started coming home weekends, learning to use the tools he'd almost rejected. His computer background actually helped him appreciate the precision of traditional woodworking. I can work from anywhere, he told me one evening on Dad's porch swing. I've been making noise for years. I want to make something real. David opened Foster & Son Traditional Woodworking in a rented space downtown, equipped with both Dad's restored tools and modern equipment. He started each class by telling the story of the tools, of Carlos and Elena, of connections that bind us across generations. These tools belong to my grandfather, but they don't belong to me. I'm borrowing them, learning from them, hopefully passing on what they teach. The important thing isn't who owns them, but who understands what they represent. The most meaningful moment came when Carlos returned with his grandson Miguel, 15 and struggling with the same disconnection that had once characterized David. Miguel was skeptical at first, but something happened when David showed him how to use the hand plane. It's like meditation, Miguel said. You have to be completely present. That's exactly right. Your great-grandfather understood that. These tools teach presence, patience, respect for materials and process. By week's end, Miguel had made a small box using techniques connecting him to both his Mexican and American great-grandparents. When he finished, he held it like gold. I made this. I actually made this. Now you understand what your great-grandfather knew, Carlos said with tears in his eyes. Making something with your hands is putting love into the world. Last weekend, David called about a commission, a dining room table for a family whose 30-year-old one had finally worn out. I'm going to use Grandpa's tools. All of them. And build it to last another 30 years, maybe longer. Your grandfather would be proud. I hope so. But I think he'd be prouder that I finally understand. What he was teaching, love isn't something you feel, it's something you do. Sometimes what you do is build something that outlasts you, something that reminds people you were here, that you cared, that you believed in making things that matter. These tools were never about wood or metal. They were about connection, too. Materials, tradition, family, the idea that we're part of something larger than ourselves. When David first rejected them, he was rejecting the very idea that he was connected to anything beyond his immediate needs, but connection, like love, isn't something you order online. It's something you build, tool by tool, story by story, choice by careful choice. My father spent his life building connections, to work, family, even a son he never met but never forgot. His tools were instruments, but the real legacy was understanding that some things are worth maintaining, repairing, passing on even when newer models are available. David understands that now. The tools are still here, still working, still teaching, not just technique, but values. Not just skills, but stories. Not just craftsmanship, but connection, and that's exactly what my father would have wanted.
Do you enjoy stories with emotion and twists? Then like, subscribe, and activate the bell. Here, every word touches you.